On my 18th birthday, my parents calmly confessed they hadn't saved a single dime for my college because they didn't believe in my potential. So, while working two grueling jobs, I discovered their devastating financial secret and planned my ultimate revenge. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Inherited Revenge. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The living room felt suffocatingly warm, though I was shivering uncontrollably. I was exactly 18 years old, wrapped in a faded fleece blanket, battling a severe chest infection that had kept me bedridden for 3 days. I had foolishly hoped that turning 18 might warrant a small celebration, perhaps a cake or even just a card placed on my nightstand. Instead, Wesley and Josephine, I had long stopped calling them Mom and Dad in my head, summoned me downstairs. Josephine was seated perfectly upright on the pristine beige sofa, adjusting the cuffs of her silk blouse. She never allowed herself to look anything less than immaculate, even on a Sunday morning in our own home. Wesley stood behind her, his hands resting in the pockets of his expensive slacks, looking out the window as if this conversation was merely a minor item on his weekend itinerary. "Sit down, Scarlett," Josephine said, her voice devoid of any maternal warmth. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She didn't offer me a glass of water to soothe my ragged throat. I sank into the armchair opposite them, pulling the blanket tighter around my shoulders. "What is it?" I rasped. Wesley finally turned away from the window. He cleared his throat, adopting the authoritative tone he used during his vague corporate consulting meetings. "Scarlett, as you know, you are officially an adult today, and with adulthood comes a necessary conversation about reality. Specifically, your future." I blinked, my fever-addled brain trying to process his words. "My future? You mean college applications? I've already submitted my FAFSA, but I need your tax information too." "That won't be necessary," Josephine interrupted smoothly. She crossed her legs, her stiletto heel catching the morning light. "We are not providing our financial information, Scarlett, nor will we be contributing to any sort of tuition." The room spun. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, but her meticulously contoured face remained impassive. "What do you mean? We've talked about state college for years. I have the grades." "Let us be entirely honest with you, since you are 18 now," Josephine continued, her tone as casual as if she were discussing the weather. "We never established a college fund for you. We discussed it years ago, and quite frankly, we honestly didn't think you'd actually go or amount to much academically. It seemed like a poor investment." The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. A poor investment. "But," I stammered, my voice breaking. "But August just turned 16. You bought him a brand new car last month. You literally bragged to everyone at the country club about his fully funded university account." Wesley sighed, a patronizing sound that grated against my eardrums. "Your brother is different, Scarlett. August has an entrepreneurial spirit. He requires a solid foundation to network and build his future. You, on the other hand, have always been, well, aggressively average. Plodding. It wouldn't make sense to drain our resources on a degree you likely won't finish or utilize." I sat there, paralyzed by the sheer audacity of their cruelty. They had watched me study late into the night, watched me bring home honor roll certificates that they promptly ignored, and the entire time, they had been quietly betting against me. They had deliberately ensured my failure to fund my younger brother's comfortable, entitled existence. Tears pricked my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I looked from Josephine's manicured nails to Wesley's polished shoes. The absolute absence of their faith in me hurt far worse than the empty bank account ever could. 2 years passed. 2 agonizing, bone-wearying years. At 20, I was a ghost of my former self, entirely consumed by the desperate machinery of survival. I had moved into a cramped, drafty apartment with 3 roommates just days after my 18th birthday. To pay for my community college classes and keep a roof over my head, I worked a soul-crushing schedule. A barista at a high-volume coffee shop from 4 in the morning until noon, followed by classes, and then evening shifts as a data entry clerk at a logistics firm. My hands were perpetually burned from the espresso machine, and my eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets harsh fluorescent office lights. Meanwhile, August was living in a luxury dormitory at an expensive private university, completely bankrolled by Wesley and Josephine. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the coffee shop was moderately busy. I was wiping down the counter, my back screaming in protest, when the bell above the door chimed. I didn't need to look up to recognize the sharp, rhythmic click of Josephine's heels. She glided to the counter, wearing a tailored trench coat that likely cost more than my entire semester's tuition. She looked me up and down, her nose wrinkling slightly at my stained apron and the dark circles sitting heavily under my eyes. "A non-fat, half-calf vanilla latte, Scarlett, and make sure the milk isn't scalded this time," she ordered, not bothering to say hello. I punched the order into the register, keeping my face perfectly blank. "That will be $5.45. She handed me a crisp $20 bill. As I counted her change, she sighed loudly, ensuring the customers behind her could hear the heavy burden of her existence. "You know, Scarlett, your father and I were discussing you just last night. We are both incredibly concerned." I paused, holding a handful of coins. "Concerned about what?" "Your attitude," Josephine said, leaning slightly over the counter. "You've been terribly distant lately. We barely see you. You didn't even come to August's send-off dinner last week. Do you have any idea how stressed your brother is? Frat rush has been exhausting for him, and you haven't so much as texted him to offer support." The sheer delusion of her words almost made me laugh. I was working 80 hours a week to afford textbooks, and she was worried I hadn't comforted my brother over the exhaustion of attending college parties. "I've been working, Josephine," I said flatly, handing her the change. She recoiled slightly at the use of her first name, a subtle tightening around her eyes. "There is more to life than waiting tables, Scarlett. Family should be a priority. You're becoming so bitter and isolated. It's truly unbecoming." She took her coffee and marched out of the shop, leaving a trail of expensive perfume in her wake. I watched her go, gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. They genuinely believed I was just a moody, distant daughter. They thought their dismissal of me had simply resulted in me fading quietly into the background, exactly as they had planned. But they had forgotten one crucial detail about the daughter they overlooked. To understand the depth of Josephine's manipulation, you had to understand the environment I was raised in. My childhood was essentially a masterclass in conditional love, where the conditions were strictly tailored to benefit Josephine's fragile ego and Wesley's demand for absolute peace. Josephine styled herself as a lifestyle director, a completely fabricated title for a woman who spent her days lunching with other wealthy women and critiquing everything around her. She had never worked a steady job in my lifetime. Instead, she demanded that the world cater to her aesthetic preferences. Throughout my high school years, I was her unpaid, unacknowledged assistant. When I wanted to take an advanced placement prep course on the weekends, Josephine threw a spectacular tantrum, claiming she needed me at home to organize her extensive wardrobe and manage the household chores because her nerves were simply too frayed. I sacrificed my own extracurriculars to ensure her life ran smoothly. I even did August's homework for him so Wesley wouldn't have to deal with the boys whining. I was the invisible glue holding their perfect image together, and my reward was absolute contempt. Josephine was a master of the subtle, tearing insult. She was deeply suspicious of anyone who possessed the independence she lacked. Whenever I managed to scrape together a few dollars from babysitting in high school, Josephine would somehow find out. She would casually mention that the household water bill was unusually high, or that my appetite was costing them too much in groceries, heavily implying that I needed to hand over my earnings to contribute. She was obsessed with financial control, demanding absolute transparency from me while remaining entirely secretive about the family's actual wealth. She presented herself to her social circle as a generous, self-sacrificing matriarch. I would often overhear her at her garden parties, loudly lamenting to her friends about how difficult it was to raise a daughter who struggled so much to find her path, all while she actively bulldozed any path I tried to build. My data entry job at the logistics firm, while exhausting, had one distinct advantage. It taught me how to trace digital paper trails. I spent my nights meticulously entering invoices, organizing payroll data, and learning the intricate ways money moved, hid, and accumulated. I learned how to read between the lines of financial statements, a skill born out of pure necessity. One late Tuesday night, while sitting alone in my freezing apartment, I was using my laptop to review my own meager banking statements. I was trying to find a way to stretch $20 over 4 days of meals. In a moment of bitter curiosity, I logged into the public county records portal. I had always wondered just how much the house I was kicked out of was actually worth. I typed in Wesley and Josephine's names. I scrolled past the property deeds and the vehicle registrations, including Auguste's expensive sports car. But then, my eyes caught something anomalous. It was a heavily redacted legal filing from 3 years prior, right before my 18th birthday. The document type was listed as a trust modification transfer. I leaned closer to the glowing screen, my heart beginning to hammer a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I knew enough from my data entry work to recognize the structure of an inherited trust. But Wesley and Josephine had always claimed our family had no generational wealth, that they were entirely self-made. I spent the next 3 hours cross-referencing public tax records and digging through obscure municipal archives. Piece by piece, a horrifying, crystal-clear picture began to emerge. There was a trust, a massive one, left by Wesley's late mother, a woman who passed away when I was an infant. And according to the original, unredacted public filing I finally managed to unearth, that money was legally designated to be split evenly into 2 educational accounts, one for August and one for me. They hadn't just refused to save for my college. They had actively stolen the future that was legally mine to fund the golden child's extravagant life. The glowing screen of my heavily battered laptop seemed to burn itself into my retinas. I sat in the oppressive silence of my freezing apartment, the only sound the erratic, frantic drumming of my own heart against my ribs. I read the digitized municipal file again, and a 4th time. My breathing became shallow, rapid, and sharp. The words on the screen did not change. The legal jargon did not magically rearrange itself into something less devastating. The estate of Margaret Aliner, irrevocable educational trust, beneficiaries, August and Scarlett, to be dispersed in equal halves upon the attainment of their 18th birthdays. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes until bursts of color exploded in the darkness. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, threatening to crush the air out of my lungs. They had known. Every single time Josephine berated me for asking for $20 for a required textbook, she knew there was a massive account sitting in a bank with my name on it. Every time Wesley gave a pompous lecture about the value of a hard-earned dollar, while tossing August the keys to a luxury vehicle, he knew he was actively stealing my future to fund my brother's present. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The moment my alarm went off at 3:30 in the morning for my barista shift, I didn't feel the usual bone-deep exhaustion. Instead, I felt a strange, cold clarity settling over my mind. For 2 years, I had been a passive victim of their narrative. I had accepted my role as the burdensome, ungrateful daughter who simply wasn't smart enough or worthy enough to deserve their financial support. But I was an accounting student now. I spent my days and nights swimming in numbers, reconciling discrepancies, and tracking missing funds for a logistics company. If there was one thing I understood with absolute, unwavering certainty, it was that money always leaves a trail. I decided in that dark, lonely morning that I was going to follow that trail to the bitter end. During my lunch break at the logistics firm, I locked myself in a bathroom stall, pulled out my phone, and began searching for legal representation. I knew I couldn't afford an hourly rate. My bank account currently held exactly $42.16, but I also knew that in cases of blatant financial fraud with a clear paper trail, certain attorneys would work on contingency. They would take a percentage of the recovered funds. It took me 4 days of calling, leaving voicemails, and facing polite rejections from receptionists before I finally secured an in-person consultation. The office of Arthur Vance, attorney at law, was located in a modest, unremarkable brick building on the edge of town. It didn't smell like the expensive, polished leather of Wesley's corporate consulting firm. It smelled of old paper, stale coffee, and lemon floor cleaner. Mr. Vance was a man in his late 50s with tired eyes, a slightly rumpled suit, and a desk buried under an avalanche of manila folders. "Take a seat, Scarlett," he said, gesturing to a wooden chair opposite him. He adjusted his reading glasses and looked down at the intake form I had filled out in the lobby. "You indicated on your form that you suspect a breach of fiduciary duty regarding a testamentary trust. That's a very serious accusation to level against your own parents." "It's not a suspicion, Mr. Vance," I said, my voice remarkably steady. I reached into my worn canvas tote bag and pulled out the thick stack of papers I had meticulously printed and organized at the public library. I slid them across his desk. "It is a documented fact, and I brought the receipts." Mr. Vance raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by my preparation. He picked up the first document, the unredacted county filing I had managed to unearth. For 10 agonizing minutes, the only sound in the office was the ticking of a wall clock and the rustle of paper as he read through my findings. I watched his eyes track back and forth across the pages. I watched his posture shift from casually attentive to rigid and intensely focused. Finally, he set the papers down, took off his glasses, and looked at me. The tiredness in his eyes had been replaced by a sharp, calculating gleam. "Scarlett," he began, his voice low and serious, "if these public records are accurate, your parents didn't just make a poor financial decision. They committed a severe act of fraud. To alter the disbursement of an irrevocable trust meant for 2 beneficiaries and channel it entirely into a single account for your brother. That requires forged signatures. It requires lying to a trustee, and it requires a willful, documented effort to defraud you of your legal inheritance." "Can you prove it?" I asked, gripping the arms of my chair. "Can you get the actual bank records, the proof that they sign my name?" "If I take this case," Mr. Vance said slowly, leaning forward, "I will subpoena the original trust documents from the bank. I will demand a full accounting of every single penny that was moved, spent, or transferred since the day you turned 18. But you need to understand something. Once we file the paperwork to demand this accounting, a bomb is going to go off in your family. There is no going back. Are you prepared for that?" I thought of my burned hands from the espresso machine. I thought of the nights I went to sleep shivering because I couldn't afford to turn on the heat. I thought of Josephine's sneering face as she told me I was a poor investment. "Mr. Vance," I said, looking him dead in the eye, "I have nothing left for them to take. Light the fuse." The opportunity to plant the first seed of panic arrived sooner than I expected. 2 weeks after I formally retained Mr. Vance, my phone buzzed with a text message from Josephine. "August is home for the weekend from university. We are having a formal family dinner on Saturday at 7. You are expected to attend and assist with the preparations and serving. Do not be late and wear something presentable for once." A month ago, I would have ignored the text, citing a double shift at work to avoid the inevitable humiliation of acting as their unpaid waitstaff. But now, armed with the knowledge of their crimes, the invitation felt like an opportunity perfectly handed to me. I needed to see their faces. I needed to test the waters and watch them squirm before the legal hammer officially fell. I arrived at their sprawling, manicured estate exactly at 7. The house was a testament to their obsession with appearances: towering columns, a circular driveway, and an interior heavily decorated in cold, impersonal shades of white and gray. I walked into the massive, open-concept kitchen. Josephine was standing by the marble island, sipping a glass of expensive red wine while a private chef she had hired for the evening arranged an elaborate charcuterie board. "You're late," Josephine snapped the moment she saw me. She didn't look at my face. Her eyes instantly dropped to my clothing. I was wearing my only decent, unwrinkled blouse and a pair of dark slacks. "And you couldn't find anything more cheerful to wear? You look like you're attending a funeral." "Traffic was bad," I lied smoothly, feeling no guilt whatsoever. Wesley walked into the room, clapping his hands together. He was wearing a tailored blazer and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ah, the prodigal daughter returns. Try to make yourself useful, Scarlett. Carry those plates to the dining room. August is already seated, and he's famished after a long week of rigorous academics." I picked up the heavy porcelain plates, my mind flashing to the fact that August's rigorous academics were entirely funded by the money stolen from my name. In the dining room, August was slouched in a high-backed chair, tapping away on his phone. He looked up briefly as I set his plate down. "Hey," he mumbled, not making eye contact. He looked well-fed, rested, and completely unburdened by the weight of the world. The dinner proceeded exactly as I anticipated. It was a theatrical performance. Of Wesley and Josephine praising August's every breath while simultaneously treating my existence as a mild inconvenience. They asked August about his fraternity brothers, his classes, and the new tires he wanted for his car. They did not ask me a single question about my life. It wasn't until the dessert plates were cleared that Josephine turned her sharp, critical gaze back to me. "So, Scarlett," she said, swirling the last drops of wine in her glass, "have you given any more thought to finding a real career path? Bouncing between coffee shops and temporary office work is hardly a foundation for a successful life. You're 20 now. It's embarrassing to tell our friends what you do." Wesley chuckled, a low, patronizing sound. "We just want you to be responsible, Scarlett. You have to understand how the real world works. Financial literacy is paramount. You can't rely on minimum wage forever." I placed my hands flat on the polished mahogany table. The wood felt cool beneath my palms. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the silence stretch out until the air in the room felt thick and uncomfortable. "It's funny you mention financial responsibility, Wesley," I said, my voice clear and carrying perfectly across the large room. I deliberately dropped the title of Dad. Wesley frowned, his thick eyebrows pulling together. "Excuse me." I said, "It's funny you mention financial literacy," I repeated, maintaining direct, unwavering eye contact with him. "Because I've been doing a lot of reading lately on that exact subject. Specifically, I've been researching the complexities of generational wealth management." Josephine let out a small, dismissive scoff. "Please, Scarlett, you barely passed high school algebra. What could you possibly be researching?" "Trust funds," I said simply. The word hung in the air, heavy and sharp. "Specifically," I continued, leaning forward slightly, "I was reading up on the legal structure of irrevocable educational trusts, like the kind established by a grandmother for her grandchildren." The reaction was instantaneous and incredibly satisfying. Wesley's hand, which had been resting casually on the table, suddenly spasmed, knocking over his empty water glass. It shattered against the hardwood floor with a loud, violent crash. Josephine's perfectly applied makeup could not hide the sudden, stark paleness that washed over her face. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. August looked up from his phone, startled by the breaking glass and the sudden, suffocating tension in the room. "What are you talking about, Scarlett? We don't have trust funds. Mom and Dad are paying for my school out of pocket." "Are they?" I asked, shifting my gaze to my brother, allowing a small, cold smile to touch my lips. Is that what they told you, August? Wesley finally found his voice. It was higher than usual, frantic and loud. That is enough, Scarlett. I will not have you come into my home and speak in riddles just to cause drama. You have absolutely no idea what you are talking about. You are completely out of line. Am I challenged, refusing to back down. Because from what I read in the public county annex filings, Margaret Aliner's estate explicitly mandated 2 beneficiaries. 2 accounts. One to be dispersed on my 18th birthday, and one to be dispersed on yours, August. Josephine stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. You have been snooping through things that do not concern you, she shrieked, her composed facade completely disintegrating. You are delirious. You are making up lies because you are jealous of your brother's success. You are sick in the head. If it's a lie, I said, standing up to match her height, then you won't mind when the bank is asked to produce the original, signed disbursement documents. I'm sure my signature on the transfer forms will look perfectly authentic, right? Wesley's face turned an ugly, mottled shade of crimson. Get out, he roared, pointing a trembling finger toward the front door. Get out of this house right now. If you ever speak of this garbage again, if you ever try to invade our family's private financial matters, I will have you arrested for digital trespassing and harassment. Do you hear me? I hear you perfectly, I said, picking up my worn tote bag. I looked at the 3 of them, Wesley hyperventilating, Josephine shaking with rage, and August staring at me with wide, confused eyes. But just so we are completely clear, this isn't a private financial matter anymore. It's a crime scene. I turned and walked out the front door, leaving them drowning in the terrified silence of their own making. The fallout from the dinner was immediate and desperate. By Monday morning, I had exactly 14 missed calls and 6 voicemails from Wesley. The progression of his tone in the messages was a fascinating study in panic. The first message was authoritative, demanding I call him back to app. Apologize for my hysterical outburst. By the third message, he was offering to help me out with a small loan if I was struggling with my rent. The final message, left at 2 in the morning, was a slurred, vicious threat promising to ruin my life if I ever contacted August or mentioned the word trust again. I didn't reply to a single one. I forwarded every voicemail and text directly to Mr. Vance. My lawyer moved with ruthless efficiency. Utilizing the threat of an immediate subpoena and a formal complaint to the State Banking Commission, he managed to compel the financial institution holding the trust to release the internal records. When I sat in Mr. Vance's office a week later, the stack of papers on his desk was significantly thicker. You were entirely correct, Scarlett, Mr. Vance said, his tone grim as he tapped a thick file. The trust was established exactly as you stated, half for you, half for your brother. The day after your 18th birthday, a document was filed with the bank authorizing the complete transfer of your half into August's account. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a photocopy of a legal release form. At the bottom, on the line-marked beneficiary signature, was my name. I stared at it. The handwriting was a sloppy, hurried attempt to mimic my looping cursive. I didn't sign this, I whispered, feeling a fresh wave of nausea wash over me. I was sick in bed that entire week. They told me they didn't have any money for me. I know you didn't, Mr. Vance said gently. It's a clear forgery. But that isn't even the worst part, Scarlett. They didn't just give your money to your brother for his education. He opened another folder and spread a series of bank statements across the desk. Once your funds were merged into the single account, Wesley and Josephine applied for legal guardianship over the management of the educational expenses, Mr. Vance explained, pointing to various highlighted lines. They used the guise of paying for August's university to treat the entire trust as a personal slush fund. Yes, they paid his tuition. Yes, they bought him a car. But look here. I leaned in, my accounting training kicking in as I scanned the ledgers. My blood turned to ice. There were massive withdrawals marked as room and board supplements that coincided exactly with the dates Wesley and Josephine went on a luxury vacation to Italy last summer. There were thousands of dollars funneled out under textbook and supply allowances that matched perfectly with the payments made to a high-end kitchen remodeling contractor. They were systematically draining my trust, to fund their lavish lifestyle, while I was literally counting pennies to buy ramen noodles. "We have them, Scarlett," Mr. Vance said quietly. "It's irrefutable fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. We are filing the formal lawsuit on Monday. But I need to ask you, how do you want to handle your brother? He is technically the primary account holder now. He will be named in the suit, even if he didn't orchestrate the fraud." I thought of August. I thought of his confused, panicked face at the dinner table. He was spoiled, entitled, and oblivious, but I didn't truly believe he knew he was driving a car bought with stolen money. "Let me handle August," I said, a plan forming in my mind. I knew August's schedule. I knew that every Thursday afternoon, he frequented a high-end cafe near his university campus to study. I took the bus across town, walking into the cafe in my faded barista apron, having just finished my morning shift. I spotted him in a corner booth, wearing a designer hoodie, casually scrolling through his laptop. He looked up when I slid into the booth across from him. "Scarlett," he said, immediately looking incredibly uncomfortable. He glanced around as if worried his friends might see him with me. "What are you doing here? Mom and Dad said you're having some kind of mental breakdown. They told me to block your number." "Of course they did," I said evenly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't show any emotion. I simply unzipped my tote bag and pulled out the thick, red rope folder Mr. Vance had given me. I dropped it onto his keyboard. "What is this?" August asked, pulling his hands back as if the folder was on fire. "That is the truth, August," I said. "And I highly suggest you read it before the federal marshals show up at your fraternity house to ask you about your involvement in wire fraud." The color drained from his face. "Wire fraud? Scarlett, you're scaring me. Stop being crazy." "Open the folder," I commanded. Reluctantly, with trembling fingers, August opened the file. I walked him through it, piece by piece. I showed him the original mandate from our grandmother. I showed him the forged signature on my 18th birthday. "They told me they just had a good year in the market," August whispered, staring at the numbers. "They said the car was a reward for my grad." "Ease." "They lied," I said bluntly. "Now look at the withdrawal ledgers." I flipped the page, pointing to the massive deductions. "Do you remember when they went to Tuscany last July? Look at the withdrawal from your educational fund 2 days prior. $35,000. Did you authorize that for your education, August?" August stared at the highlighted line. His eyes darted rapidly across the page, recognizing the dates of the kitchen remodel, the dates Josephine bought her new jewelry, all perfectly aligned with massive cash withdrawals from the account that held my stolen inheritance. I watched the exact moment the illusion shattered. The spoiled, oblivious facade melted away, replaced by genuine, unadulterated horror. His breathing hitched, and he dragged his hands through his hair, gripping the roots. "Oh my God," he choked out, his eyes filling with tears. "They stole it. They stole it from you, and they used my name to do it. Scarlett, I swear to you, I didn't know. I never saw the actual bank statements. Dad always handled the logins. I swear I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said, my voice softening just a fraction. "But ignorance isn't a legal defense anymore, August. The lawsuit is being filed on Monday. You are going to be subpoenaed. You have a choice to make right now. You can keep playing the golden child and go down with them for conspiracy and fraud, or you can stand with me and tell the truth." August looked at the forged signature on the paper. He looked at my exhausted, pale face. He looked at my burned hands resting on the table. For the first time in his life, he truly saw the cost of his comfortable existence. He closed the folder, his jaw setting with a newfound, rigid determination. He wiped his eyes and looked at me, no longer a spoiled teenager, but a young man terrified of the criminals who raised him. "Tell me what I need to do," August said. The perfect venue for the destruction of a perfectly fabricated life is, appropriately enough, a place built entirely on appearances. Wesley and Josephine had spent months organizing what they pompously titled a celebration of academic excellence for August. It was held in the grand ballroom of the Oak Creek Country Club, a sprawling, opulent room filled with crystal chandeliers, towering floral arrangements of white hydrangeas, and tables draped in heavy, cream-colored silk. They had invited over 100 guests: Wesley's corporate clients, Josephine's fellow socialites, extended family members who only ever heard heavily curated versions of our lives, and a smattering of August's fraternity brothers. It was designed to be a crowning monument to their success as parents. It was, instead, the perfect stage for their absolute ruin. I arrived at exactly 8 o'clock, right in the middle of the main course. I did not wear my faded barista apron, nor did I wear the sad, wrinkled blouse from our last disastrous dinner. I had taken a small advance from Mr. Vance against the inevitable settlement to purchase a sharply tailored, dark navy business suit. I had my hair pulled back into a severe, professional knot. I looked exactly like the corporate auditor I was studying to become. Walking beside me was an associate from Mr. Vance's firm. A tall, impeccably dressed man holding a thick, leather-bound portfolio containing the formal lawsuit, the subpoenas, and the irrefutable bank records. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung open, and I stepped inside. The immediate sensory overload, the clinking of crystal wine glasses, the low, melodic hum of a live string quartet, the scent of expensive roasted tenderloin and heavy perfume, washed over me, but it did not make me falter. I felt an incredible, icy calm radiating from the center of my chest. I walked purposefully across the patterned carpet, weaving through the crowded tables. A few extended family members caught my eye, offering confused, polite nods, clearly wondering why the troubled, distant daughter had suddenly appeared looking like a courtroom prosecutor. Wesley and Josephine were seated at the head table, elevated slightly on a dais at the front of the room. August was seated to their right, looking pale and deeply uncomfortable in his tailored tuxedo. He saw me approaching long before our parents did. His posture stiffened, and he gave me a barely perceptible nod. He knew what was coming. We had planned it. I stopped directly in front of the head table. The string quartet, noticing the sudden tension radiating from our interaction, faltered and slowly stopped playing. A hush began to ripple outward through the room as guests turned their heads to see the disruption. Josephine noticed me first. Her fork, holding a delicate piece of asparagus, paused in midair. The artificial smile she had plastered on her face for her wealthy friends instantly contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "Scarlet," she hissed, keeping her voice low but incredible. "Live venomous. What in the world are you doing here? You are not invited. You are interrupting a highly exclusive event. Security will escort you out immediately." Wesley stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with trembling fingers, attempting to project an aura of calm authority to the watching room. "Scarlet, sweetheart," he said loudly, forcing a jovial, patronizing tone for the benefit of his clients seated nearby. "I think you're a bit confused. Let's step outside into the lobby and talk about whatever is upsetting you, all right? We don't need to make a scene." "I am not confused, Wesley," I said, my voice projecting clearly and effortlessly across the sudden, heavy silence of the ballroom. I did not use a microphone, but the absolute stillness of the crowd ensured every word carried to the very back of the room. "And we are not stepping outside. You have spent my entire life putting on a performance for these people. I think it is only fair that they get to see the grand finale." "Security," Josephine shrieked, no longer caring about appearances. She stood up, knocking her crystal wine glass over. A dark red stain began to spread rapidly across the pristine white silk tablecloth, looking shockingly like a wound. "Get this deranged girl out of my sight." "No one is calling security," I stated calmly. I turned to the lawyer's associate standing beside me. He stepped forward and placed the heavy, leather-bound portfolio directly onto the table, right over the spreading wine stain. "Wesley and Josephine," I said, making sure to enunciate every single syllable. "You are being formally served with a civil lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty, embezzlement, wire fraud, and the forgery of a legal document." The collective gasp from the ballroom was audible. 100 wealthy, gossip-hungry guests leaned in, their eyes wide with shock. Wesley's face drained of all color, leaving him looking sickly and gray beneath the warm chandelier light. You have absolutely no proof of these insane allegations," he stammered, his confident facade shattering into a million irreparable pieces. "This is slander. I will sue you into the ground." "The proof is in that folder," I replied, pointing to the leather binding. "It contains the original unredacted trust documents from grandmother's estate, explicitly naming me as a 50% beneficiary. It contains the forged release forms you submitted the day after my 18th birthday while I was bedridden with a fever. And most importantly, it contains the meticulously highlighted bank ledgers proving that you used my stolen inheritance to fund your luxury vacation to Italy, your high-end kitchen remodel, and Josephine's extensive jewelry collection." I turned slightly, addressing the silent, staring crowd. "For 2 years, my parents have told you all that I was a failure. They told you I was aggressively average, that I lacked ambition, and that I was too distant to be part of this family. The truth is, I have been working 80 hours a week cleaning espresso machines and entering data on the night shift just to afford my community college tuition, while they lived a life of luxury funded entirely by the money they stole from their own daughter." Josephine was hyperventilating, her hands clutching the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles were white. "August," she cried out, turning desperately to her golden child. "August, tell them she is lying. Tell them how hard your father and I work. Tell them this is a jealous, bitter lie." This was the moment, the ultimate test of the alliance August and I had forged in the corner booth of that quiet cafe. August slowly stood up. He did not look at Josephine. He did not look at Wesley. He reached into the pocket of his expensive tuxedo jacket and pulled out the heavy set of keys to the luxury sports car they had bought him. The silence in the room was so profound, you could hear the soft clatter of silverware as a guest dropped a knife in shock. August looked directly at Wesley, his eyes completely hardened. "They aren't lies, Dad," he said, his voice shaking slightly before solidifying into a tone of absolute disgust. "I saw the ledgers. I saw the withdrawal dates. You told me my entire life that we were self-made. You told me you were rewarding my hard work. You used me to launder the money you stole from my sister." "August, please," Wesley begged, reaching out a trembling hand. "You don't understand the complexities of wealth management. We did it for the family. We did it for you." "You did it for yourselves," August countered fiercely. He raised the car keys and slammed them down onto the table, right next to the lawsuit. The metallic crash echoed through the microphone on the podium. "I am voluntarily surrendering all assets tied to that fraudulent account, and I have already given a full, sworn statement to Mr. Vance cooperating with Scarlett's investigation. I am absolutely done being your excuse." August turned, stepped down from the dais, and walked over to stand beside me. The physical distance he put between himself and our parents was the final, undeniable validation of their guilt. Josephine collapsed back into her chair, sobbing hysterically into her hands, her perfect image completely and utterly destroyed in front of the only people whose opinions she ever valued. Wesley stood frozen, staring blankly at the lawsuit on the table, a man who had suddenly realized he had nowhere left to hide. I looked at the two of them, small, broken, and exposed, and I felt the heavy, suffocating weight of the last 2 years finally lift from my shoulders. "Enjoy the rest of your celebration," I said quietly, turning on my heel. With August walking proudly by my side, I navigated back through the silent, staring crowd of elites, leaving the Oak Creek Country Club behind us, completely free. The downfall of Wesley and Josephine was not swift, but it was absolute, a slow and agonizing dismantling of everything they held dear. The public humiliation at the country club was merely the first domino to fall. The gossip spread through their social circle like a virulent wildfire. Within a week, Josephine's friends had completely ostracized her, removing her from committee boards and refusing to return her phone calls. The social exile she had always feared became her permanent reality. The legal and professional consequences were far more severe. The lawsuit I filed, coupled with Auguste's devastating sworn testimony, triggered a massive investigation. When Wesley's corporate consulting firm caught wind of the federal wire fraud and embezzlement allegations, they immediately terminated his partnership, citing a strict moral turpitude clause in his contract. Stripped of his income and facing astronomical legal fees for his defense, Wesley was forced to do the one thing he swore he would never do: liquidate his image. They had to put the sprawling, manicured estate on the market. They had to sell the luxury vehicles, the imported art, and Josephine's extensive jewelry collection just to keep their heads above water and repay the stolen funds they owed to my trust. It took 14 months of grueling depositions, mediation, and endless paperwork, but the justice system, guided by the relentless expertise of Mr. Vance, finally prevailed. Wesley and Josephine accepted a harsh plea deal to avoid federal prison time. They were sentenced to 5 years of strict probation, hundreds of hours of community service, and legally mandated to restore every single penny they had drained from my inheritance, with interest. The day the final settlement check cleared into my newly established, entirely secure bank account, I sat in my small apartment and simply cried. They were not tears of sorrow, but tears of profound, overwhelming relief. I was no longer a victim. I was whole. I immediately quit my grueling barista job. I gave notice at the logistics firm, thanking them for the data entry experience that ultimately gave me the tools to save my own life. I paid my remaining community college tuition in full, transferred my credits to a prestigious state university, and enrolled as a full-time accounting student, finally able to focus entirely on my future without the crushing weight of exhaustion dragging me down. Through it all, the most unexpected and beautiful outcome of the entire ordeal was the genuine healing of my relationship with Auguste. Stripped of the toxic, entitled environment our parents had created, he truly blossomed. Without the stolen trust fund to rely on, Auguste had to take out standard student loans. He moved out of the luxury fraternity house and into a modest shared apartment off campus. He got a part-time job working at a campus bookstore to pay for his groceries. It humbled him, but it also grounded him. We started meeting for coffee every Sunday afternoon, not at a high-end cafe, but at a quiet, unassuming diner halfway between our two campuses. During one of those Sunday meetings, exactly a year after the confrontation at the country club, Auguste slid a small, brightly wrapped box across the diner table. "What's this?" I asked, looking at the bow. "It's a birthday present," Auguste said, offering a shy, genuine smile. "I know I missed your 18th and your 19th, and I know a coffee mug doesn't make up for any of that, but I bought it with money from my own paycheck. No trusts, no parents, just me." I opened the box to find a sturdy, ceramic mug with the logo of my new university printed on the side. It was simple, inexpensive, and absolutely perfect. "Thank you, Auguste," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. He squeezed back, a silent promise between us that the cycle of manipulation had ended with our generation. Wesley and Josephine moved into a small, rented condominium on the outskirts of the city. We never spoke to them again. They had chosen their wealth and their image over their children, and in the end, they lost both. I, on the other hand, had started with nothing, fought for the truth, and built a life of total independence and peace. The ledgers were finally balanced, and the rest of my story belonged entirely